Hey there, Starseeds, Descended Masters, Lightworkers. In this video, I'll continue talking about the ET origins of human spirituality, and the first video I made of this series. Well, this is the second one. So just to recap the first, I briefly described how from the oneness, from the all, when it split so that it could know itself, and went out into the created world, as it were. I looked there at the way it did this through the establishment of dimensions or densities of consciousness. So when the split happened, the first consciousness that arose, the first density, you can say, was mineral. It's atoms, minerals. It's a very basic matter. After billions of years, as the story goes, this developed into animals. That would be two-dimensional, second-dimensional consciousness. So the animal is intelligent, but it's not self-aware. It has no language, doesn't know that itself is a being. It just exists. The second-dimensional consciousness is instinctive, largely instinctual. Okay. Then what happens is that animal evolves, or some of those animals evolve and develop third density consciousness, which is what we know as human consciousness. And predominantly on this planet now is, I'd say, still third density now. At third density, you are aware of yourself. You're I'm Russell, I am this, I do that. You have goals, you strive for things, you suffer because of your identity. Now this is all in accordance with the original plan of the One, which was to separate and go out from itself, to become not itself, so that it could know itself. So the human and other races, galactic races, of the same nature are wonderful achievements, actually quite miraculous. If you think that in a second dimension meat body, there can arise a consciousness that knows of itself as an entity, as a somebody, as a something, as a being, as a fragment of God, and can begin to conceptualize God as something outside itself, or even within itself. That is quite a miraculous achievement. What happens then is that evolves, and we are moving into fourth density, which is more about the love. It is now, how do I express as love? And higher densities as well. Density 5 is wisdom. How do I apply wisdom to that? Now we are sitting at that very important boundary between the third and fourth density, and the graduation into fourth density is the graduation to love frequency. And I said in this first video, I borrowed a lot from the Law of One teachings, and their emphasis there is on the task being of polarization. Meaning choosing at this level the way you want to continue the next part of your evolution as either service to self or service to others. Excuse me. Service to self originally was a good thing because you're serving self, but it became and by nature, by intention, in fact, quite a self-serving path. So service to self would be, I'm serving myself at the expense of others. So it lends itself to things like domination and control. And we've all played out those things of domination and control in our personal lives, and we see it in the world. So the idea with the Law of One teachings is that at this level of third density, we start to specialize and choose a route. It's like going to college and then you specialize in your majors. So which major do you choose? And the other one is, of course, service to others, which is, I'm going to explore love via others. Like, my good is your good is mine. It's no use me doing something that serves me but is detrimental to you. That is the pure service to others. Each side has its positives and negatives. Okay, so the idea from that video was to ascend, really, to graduate. What you want to do is to choose your orientation and then to polarize more into that to study the path, as it were. So most people watching this video who identify as light workers, or spiritual people, or as awakening beings, will by nature be service to others. We will be activating, working with the heart center. And I think most people by nature on this planet will be that way inclined, although most of us are unconscious and are not actively making any choice. So you have a great number of people who simply bumble along and are good by default and sometimes bad by default. They haven't consciously chosen a specialization. So my message there was just choose a specialization and work on it. And for this channel over here, because I don't know much about that darker path, which is a valid path, we will concentrate on the service to others, because most of you will be focusing on that. But I do need to mention this because it all goes to the major theme of integration of opposites. And everything I say in this, even when I touch on galactic history, I will bring it back to the psychological and spiritual lessons for us now. So I'm only presenting galactic histories as a framework for where we are. So you must always just test everything in yourself, like, is this information useful to me in my spiritual journey? Does it help me understand where I am and where I want to go? That's all. You can ditch everything I say about galactic history, because I'm getting most of it from research, from books that I read and that resonate. So you instantly, oh yeah, that feels right, that answers some questions. And I've been hesitant to talk about that because I thought, well, you can't prove it, but yet I'm talking about it simply as almost like archetypes or metaphors to help us understand where we are now. And the issue of polarization will come up a lot, and integration. That's the whole evolutionary story of our spiritual growth. Now, before I go on with today's session, I want to just emphasize, when I talked about polarization in the law of one teachings, polarization is, do you polarize either to service to self or service to others? And then you ascend, you sort of graduate and go slightly different paths. You both go to fourth density of love, but the one is learning very much more intensely love for self and others, and the other one is love for self exclusively. It's fourth density. Both are forms of love. So that's one sense of polarization. So sometimes if I say polarization, if I'm referring to that, I mean it's a good thing you want to polarize, but mostly when we talk about polarization, and like in today's session and perhaps future ones, polarization will be the opposite of integration, and where we want to aim for is integration. I'll remind you of this if it doesn't make sense. So in this session I want to look at how does, from the split from the one, the great one, how did that emerge through our beings? Because in the first video I talked about the dimensions of densities. Now let's talk about the beings that inhabited that, and what relevance it has for us. Now, as the story goes, and what I'm getting from today's, the story is coming from Lissa Royal's book, The Golden Lake. So if you're really interested in galactic stuff, look at Lissa Royal's work. The Golden Lake is a very good one. So one can get really lost in this whole thing of galactic history because there's so many complicating factors involving timelines that it's almost impossible to lay down a proper history. So what I'm presenting here is just like stories, just like archetypal stories. So take the archetypes of it and see how it relates to you, and ditch what doesn't work. Okay, but as the story goes, so the one, the great one, the nothing, the void, God, wants to know itself, so it splits and it creates these dimensions of consciousness, and within that it's evolution, as I said, first density, second density, third, then you have intelligent material beings. Now as the story goes, one of the first material beings that come into this part of the universe came through where we would call, in the regional space of the constellation of Lyra. So we call those the Lyran beings, Lyrans. Okay, so the Lyrans are the first humanoid conscious beings that come into this universe. From where? Who knows? Doesn't matter. So now, because at this stage the universe is going on an outward flow, it's from the one, it's exploding outward like a big bang. It wants to explore and go out in the world and explore. That original motion is the primal split there is into a masculine energy. We're going out to explore the qualities of characteristics of your being that you want in this outward phase is one who is going to explore, who will be full of that masculine energy of adventure and exploration. You can think of Vikings, you can think of explorers. That's kind of what they were. I'm having an image of Vikings now because I'm watching that on Netflix, and that's very much that energy of let's get in a boat and sail across and see what's on that side of the water, and when we get there, let's take what's there because it's fun. Okay, so that is their being, and entirely appropriate for that phase of our evolution. God, if you like, wants it to explode and explore and go out, take risks. All well and good. So what happens for a long time is that this exploration happens, and as you know, like the Vikings, there will be conquering that happens, a lot of warlike activity that happens. Also, the male-female balance was not at all balanced, because the outward is very much favored. And you need strong, aggressive beings to conquer space and to go away from the lovely, warm, cozy home of the one. So you need a strong sense of forgetting. So the masculine energy is the outward forgetting. Now it happened that over millions of years of this evolution within this Lyran civilizations, now they'd spread out as the story goes, within that some of them began to feel that this was they grew tired of fighting, they grew tired of war, and they began to look for more inward expression. So you could say almost like a little impulse of that feminine was reawakened in them in reaction to the outward. So there was some civilizations breakaways happened. So one of these became what we know as the Vegas. They broke away. They're Lyran in nature. They settle in an area of space where they want to develop themselves and be a bit more inward. In fact, they develop as warlike as the Lyrans are, the spiritual, the vegans become. But okay, and let's deal with the positives first. So what they did was they became very inward. They discovered meditation, and also discovered nature mysticism. They found a way to connect very much with nature. So there is this thing in cultures called vegan mysticism, and you can see it today apparently in sort of primal religions, in all those traditional earth religions, spiritualities that revere the nature. That is related to vegan spirituality, vegan mysticism. It's some nature mysticism. Shamanism probably would come into that. So that's one element of the vegans. But now the problem is, so they got this level right. They got this level of spirituality. They got their meditation good. The difficulty is that at a macrocosmic level, the universe is still an outward flow. The main drive is still masculine, to explore outward. It's still favoring the conquering mode and the control. Now you have a race that wants to go inward. So inwardly they'll be going inward, but the direction of the universe is still outward. So it's not really favoring their goals. So this is what happens. And you can see it happening around. It might happen in you or those around you. It still goes on today. You discover meditation, it's wonderful. You go in, But what happens is you get stuck in the mind. So you go inward, and you go and you find this center, you find the mental center, you find the mind center, and you think, hey, hallelujah, this is amazing. Suddenly we have control. We can control our reality. We can, think positive and do all these things and meditate for hours a day, and things are actually going quite well for us. We gain a certain power. So there you see the devil comes in. So these polarities will continually re-manifest themselves. Even if you try to bring integration in some sense, you'll be tempted by the disintegration. So what they did in becoming spiritual, they meditated and they discovered the mind, and they went into the mind and found a power in the mind. Mind power. You can still see people today promoting mind power as a spiritual practice. So we can see that is not always, let's just say it's a valid way, but maybe it's not the full story of where we really want to go. So let's just say they stuck at that level because there was nobody else to teach them, because they're the early races, nobody else to teach them that there's something else. They hadn't got to the heart. They hadn't realized that below the mind chakra, these third crown, and here there's the heart. You're going to sink into the heart, because a very dangerous thing happens when you sink into the heart. You lose control. You lose your ability. You lose your ability to mentally control outcomes. You discover the now. The now is very dangerous to the mind, and the ego. It absolutely is destructive to the ego. So the ego will not let you go there. So that's what happened to the Vegans. Is they went one step inside and mastered that level, but the ego was still very much there, and found a way to control. One of the breakthroughs that they made in control was they learned how to control emotion, and they found this was a great power. So they became very good, and they concentrated on controlling their emotions. Eventually they started having less and less emotion. Now you can see this today in certain teachings that say control your emotions. Even certain spiritual teachings really look down on emotions and promote the mind. They don't know that they're really just promoting the ego. You've got to go into that wild, unruly emotions, because then you get closer to the heart. But nobody had taught them about that yet. Okay, so you see these patterns playing out now. That's why I'm making this series, to see the patterns that are happening now in the world, in our spiritual life, political life. These are the stories and archetypes where they come from. So the Vegans were having a great time getting control of this, and they created this race that was very controlled. Now, Spock from Star Trek, he is a total vegan archetype. So if you want to know what those people look like, just think of Spock. Very good-natured, very ethical, spiritual in the sense, but of the mind. And Spock's bemusement and bemusement at humans, and slight disdain because they're so wild and they have these emotions, and yet part of him wants to have those emotions. He's trying to feel what humans are. There you see that split happening. So you get a great, like Spock, you get mental powers, intellectual powers, but you lose your spiritual power. You lose your emotional powers. Okay, so that's the one. These are the Vegans. A branch of them were really hardcore. They really ran with this, and these Vegans like Spock are actually, they're not doing it half as good as you can do it. We're going to go even further, and we're going to really, really make a science of eradicating the emotional body. We have no use for emotions at all. We're just mental. Science will solve all our problems. You see where that comes up in the world. So now this group from the vegan lineage went off, and they became what we would call today the Zetas, Zeta Reticuli, and those are in physical form of the tall greys. So you look at them as totally unexpressive, and they evoke fear in humans. We evoke fear in them. But their story is that in pursuing this, they cut off the emotions, but they, instead of destroying the emotional body, they simply sever the connection to it. So it's physically, you can do that at a DNA level, sever that connection to the body, but the body, the emotional body, luckily doesn't go away. It's still there. It's just we're not connected to it. Okay, so they did that, and then as the story goes, they had huge wars on their planet. They went underground. They couldn't reproduce anymore. They had to come clone themselves. So they began to know that they really got to know that their way was a dead end. That pushed the mind as far as it could go. But now their problem was that they couldn't go back because they haven't got their connection to the emotional body. And anyway, just the mere idea of it fills them with, I'd say, horror. They can't experience horror, but their equivalent would be distaste. Perhaps they can feel that. But they know they've got to go there. They have enough inward connection, they have enough spiritual mind connection that they are guided. Okay, and the guidance says, you guys, there's only one way that you're going to get through this and survive as a species, is to reconnect your emotional body. And the Zetas said, well, how do we do that? Because we've lost that connection. So the founders, okay, there's a story of the founder race, the founder species. They're kind of like the guardians. They oversee this whole drama. They pull the strings a little bit in a benevolent way, and see that this whole experiment of creation just goes along, and they're guides. The founders said, we've heard your prayer, that you do not want to annihilate yourselves completely, and that you want to reverse what you've done, and that it's been an interesting experiment, and you're ready for something new, and you've asked us for a solution, and here we have a solution for you. And the solution is this: go out and find a race of beings who you're compatible with, which still has a strong emotional body. So can you see where this is headed? So the Zetans looked and they saw that there's Earth. Very emotional beings on planet Earth. So that's what brought them into our sphere of existence. So the Zetas have been interacting with us for a long time. We have a lot of negative feeling towards them because we're such opposites. But because we're such opposites, we've got a lot to learn, a lot to gain from each other. And once again, now we talk about the integration, and we're talking about service to self versus service to others. So one story goes that the Zetans are forcing us to they're taking our DNA without our permission, all that, which would be an infringement of free will and would be a total service to self at the expense of others. So that is one possibility of this interaction. The other possibility is the higher one, is that this is a sanctioned and agreed by all parties interaction of mutual benefit. The Zetas would take DNA from volunteers to re-engineer their connection with the emotional body, so they can become more human-like, and then we will be offered something in return. And as the story goes, this is the hybrid program. Now I'm going to territory here which I cannot vouch for myself. I don't know this for a fact. I just know what feels possible. And when some people talk about the hybrid, there's a lot of negativity. You see, they bring in the polarization. Instead of, you could look at it with integrative eyes, integrative, from the heart. Say, wow, these Zetas did a really interesting experiment, mind power. It took them so far, and I've done mind power before. I didn't know it was so powerful, but I don't want to make that mistake. So, hey, that's cool. If you guys want to come and grab some DNA, it doesn't cost me anything. It's like a little sample. Take it and see what you do with it. It helps you be a good survive, evolve. Wonderful. Let's see what we can make. So there's now your service to others interaction. So let's choose that story. And within, there's probably groups with nefarious purposes. There will always be the ones who are trying something else. But let's just take the higher road for now. So now the story with the higher road of the service to others and the sanctioned swapping of this DNA is that they're using that supreme intellect now to create a hybrid race, which is the Esasani. If you listen to Bashar, the channelings of Bashar, you can look into that. That is a future humanity, future human Zeta hybrid. Future, but existing in the now, so we can connect with them. But that's our future way. So there is this sense of something new is created from this interaction. The myth of the Zetas, the tall greys, they look very strange to us, and in the abduction, so-called abductions, they create a lot of fear in us because we perceive them as without emotions, and there might have been within that, from their side, some clumsiness and some inability to understand human emotion and fear. So they might study it like scientists study lab animals. They're curious, but they don't understand the pain. So that's what has been happening. They don't understand, but they want to understand because they need. When they react with fear to humans, because humans are the total like wild barbarians. They can be loving, they can be violent, they can be in pain, they can be in bliss. So humans have got a full range of from hell to heaven. They can be divine, demonic. A human being can go from, in the space of seconds, from one to the other. There's hugely curious in the universe and quite unique, apparently. So that has been the quality of that interaction, and one should look at it, one can look at it as the positive, as an integrative experience. So now the lesson of us is now the integration. How do we learn from those others, of their experiences, and how's it playing out in the world now? You can see very much the theme of science will solve everything. Let's become more in the mind. Let us control the mind more. So it's an interesting exploration to do that, but you can also see it lends itself to that ultra-polarization and the taking away from the emotional body. Now, here's where also it's interesting with the spiritual community, because we've also been taught to think positive and not feel into the negative. This is starting to crumble a bit now as people wake up. Well, you can't. There's this thing called toxic positivity. So we want to know how to be present with our negative emotions, but it's very difficult because not many teachers talk about it. I will be talking about this in other videos. It'll become the main. It's almost like the main. It's becoming the main lesson, the main integrative evolutionary lesson of humanity is to integrate the emotions. So if we can do that, very few races have done it, especially with our range of possible emotions. I'll talk more in maybe the next video about Pleiadians and Syrians. But the Pleiadians in their earlier evolution were very much like New Ages and positive thinkers. So the whole thing was think positive, avoid the negative. That was their answer to the troublesome thing of emotions. So the Spock crew, the Vegans, said, we'll feel nothing. Pleiadians said, no, we've got to feel something. We don't want to end up like the Zetans. We're going to feel our emotions, but we're going to feel certain emotions. So we'll squash just some of them. So they created for themselves disease that way. The only way to heal that was then to face their shadow. So the Pleiadian teachings are a lot about facing your shadow, facing the other, facing the dark, facing your shadow. They're still the love bunnies. They still love. They still favor that, as we would also. But they know that the path to that in a genuine way is to recognize everybody else within them. Recognize the shadow. Recognize the dark within them. That's the process towards integration, and that is a lesson for us as well. So we want to do that, something similar. Apparently we've got it a bit more difficult because we have very wide range of emotions, because humanity is really a mixture of a lot of different races, almost like an experiment, as the story goes, to see if we can integrate everybody in one form. That's us. That's why it is so difficult. So I'll be talking in future videos about this, how to work with the negative emotion, how to be with the negative, how to create from there, how to create with the negative. You don't have to think positive all the time. You don't have to eliminate the negative. That will just create more of the same. We don't want more of the same. We want integration. We want something new. So I'm going to draw it to a close there, because for today, that brings in the core message is of the integration. And you've seen a little bit of the experiments. What I wanted to show you today was some of the experiments that I've done before of the outward masculine and then a desire to bring in the feminine, with that was the vegans, and how that didn't quite work because it wasn't quite the right time. They didn't have the wisdom to make it work. That led to its own polarization. And that polarization, the ultra polarized form, is the Zetas, who are now coming back to humanity to pick up what they've lost. So it's all these lessons that are coming together to see if we now can make it work. The others have made it work as well. They've ascended, but we're doing it in a unique body, unique environment. So that is our game. My message is always to be careful of the polarization, and there's a lot of polarization in the world now. In the New Age community, if you haven't noticed, is absolutely split down the middle. Some are going to the far right, some to the left. It's quite a confusing time. So if I can offer something to help navigate that, it is look inside yourself first. When you're triggered in the outside world, if you're triggered by what seems like control, take your mind off that person or that thing and put it in yourself. Where am I in control? Where am I wanting control? Where have I got an issue with control? When you heal that, when you integrate that, you will see the story differently, and you will then be at a higher frequency with that control. Maybe it was never there, but then you will, and even if it is, you'll elevate yourself to where it doesn't matter. Like a mask. Some people are very upset about wearing masks. But you can pick it up and say, this is a piece of cloth. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. If I must wear it when I go outside, it means nothing. I have no charge on that. I might be charged by other things during lockdowns and things. Then I must look inside. Now there's a particularly Pleiadian teaching. Lyrans also go there in a bit more scientific sense. We don't want to repeat those mistakes, guys, because we get then drawn back into the polarizing conflict. Now the service to self, folks, the ones we call the dark path, are very interested in perpetuating these divisions. So, because if we get drawn into facing them full on, as we engage with them, we stay at that frequency where they want us to stay. Until we see that they are us as well, or are God, then we no longer have to engage with them. And we leave the field. So I'm always saying, leave the field of that particular conflict. Unless there's something direct you can do, like vote vote in elections, petition your senator, whatever it is. Do the sort of normal housekeeping things. But for the rest, avoid the triggering into any duality. Always bring that home and see it as you. That is me. Donald Trump, you are me. That was my meditation. Not sure I've succeeded there. But that is you don't have to succeed. It's the discipline, it's the practice. See? Then you heal the divide. Then it's no longer an issue. It's just me too. I can also be like that. I could maybe actually use more of that. I can maybe take some of that quality. Hey? You see, he is me. I am him. In that sense. Integration. Okay. Let's leave it there for today. And we will continue. I plan at least one more of these E.T. Human Spirituality talks. Good.